Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with your host, this guy, Bill Reimer. I've got a heavy one to lay on you today, and I hope you stick with me to the end, because it gets better as it goes on. It usually does, but in this one I've tried particularly hard. I have been listening to former Liberal Party hacks like Warren Kinsella decrying how radical the party has become and call for a return to the center, whatever that may mean. In a recent article in the Toronto Sun entitled "My Latest, Judge Justin," Kinsella writes, "You can't judge yourself. More specifically, you're not allowed to decide or control or influence a case in which you are one of the main players. In law, that's as basic as it gets. The Bible says we can and should judge ourselves. Yes, it is in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5, where it goes on about testing yourself and examining yourself. But that's not the law. The law is quite clear. No one is permitted to stand in judgment of themselves. In law, it is a principle that has been around for centuries. There's even a Latin phrase for it, Nemo, iudex, in causa sua. That essentially means no one should be a judge in their own cause. It is an ancient principle of what is called natural law, the unchanging moral principles that serve as the basis of governing all human conduct. Natural laws are considered so fundamental that they cannot even be debated. In Canada, the notion that no one should have the power to judge themselves is seen in Section 21 of the Conflict of Interest Act. The law reads, "A public office holder shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote on any matter in respect of which he or she would be in conflict of interest." The public office holder here is one Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. The discussion or debate here is the interference of China in Canada's federal elections in 2019 and 2021. Now here's my question. Has Kinsella forgotten that a downhill slide begins at the top of a slope and proceeds further downward as every inch of high ground is given way due to the very force of gravity causing the descent? The LPC has for decades led a fanatical race down said slope toward the lowest common denominator. They are the political party largely responsible for waging war on competence itself. Therefore, the very folks who started the downhill slide are now complaining where the race to the bottom is taking them. The fact that they are complaining about what they began exhibits arrogance and a total lack of self-awareness on their part. And people like Kinsella are responsible for the demise of their own party. But in this period of governmental overreach and incompetence which borders on criminality, let us examine the proper functioning of each branch of government to determine where and why we are losing the high ground. The executive branch of government is responsible for delivering programs and services to the population within the framework of laws, expenditures, and tax measures approved by legislature. Keep in mind, approved by the legislature, since it ought never act on its own accord without proper parliamentary oversight. Canada is a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy founded on the rule of law and respect for rights and freedoms. The government acts in the name of the Crown but derives its authority from the Canadian people. But can we say that Trudeau, with his constant betrayal of our trust, has the support and confidence of the majority of Canadians? Or even of the lower house, if his government were not falsely being propped up by the NDP? Canada's parliamentary system stems from the British or Westminster tradition. Parliament consists of the Crown, the Senate, and the House of Commons, and laws are enacted once they are agreed by all three parts. Since Canada is a federal state, responsible for lawmaking is shared among 1 federal, 10 provincial, and 3 territorial governments. The judiciary is responsible for the interpretation and application of the law and the Constitution and for giving impartial judgments. A cursory glance at these statements clearly demonstrates where the system of governance in Canada has become corrupted by virtue of ignoring these clearly defined functions and limitations placed on each branch of our constitutional form of government. The Westminster system we inherited from our ancestor serves to both limit government while defending the inherent rights of each citizen without prejudice, which is why diversity, inclusivity, and equity cannot peacefully coexist or function within a parliamentary system which must, by rule of law, remain blind to our identity by treating all identically under the law. The LPC has deliberately torn the blinders from Lady Justice's eyes to undo centuries of the progress of liberty. For in the past, we find there was greater awareness of the need for treating all identically under the law than we do today. Following John Graves Simcoe's work, precipitated by the Chloe Cooley incident in Niagara, our first legislative assembly in Niagara-on-the-Lake, then Newark, passed the Act Against Slavery in 1793, the first legislation to limit slavery in the British Empire. The English colonists of Upper Canada took pride in this distinction with respect to the French Canadian populace of Lower Canada. The Upper Canadians valued their common law legal system as opposed to the civil law of Quebec, which they had chafed under since 1763. This was one of the primary reasons for the partition of 1791. Simcoe collaborated extensively with his Attorney General John White on this file. And his address before the first Parliament sat to the Legislative Assembly, and I quote Simcoe, "The principles of the British Constitution do not admit of that slavery which Christianity condemns. The moment I assume the government of Upper Canada, under no modification will I assent to a law that discriminates by dishonest policy between natives of Africa, America, or Europe." John Graves Simcoe in his address to the Legislative Assembly. D.I.E. recreates the very prejudices that John Graves Simcoe sought to address 232 years ago in 1791, even as it affords unconstitutional powers to the state to engage in policies that damage the rule of law while vilifying that portion of the population who have been here the longest. Since those who are engaging in these policies are lawyers like Kinsella, they are obviously as aware as I am of the damage one does to our heritage and inheritance by mischaracterizing and alienating substantial portions of the population who value our sacred institutions and do not want to see them corrupted by radical identity politics. Return to the center? Let me be absolutely clear. Since we have descended into a chasm with a rapidity which leaves me dizzy, by what means are we to scale back up a slope so steep that rappelling ropes, climbing gear, and mountaineering training would be required to scale back up the rocky face of ruin without causing an avalanche which will cast us even further into the depths of woke insanity? The values espoused by John Graves Simcoe are the very values which built this land. They exist in complete contradiction to the values being espoused by the current executive branch of government under Trudeau and most parliamentarians. If we cannot manage to utterly reverse the ideological attack on the very principles which created Magna Carta, English common law, and the Westminster parliamentary system, then Canada will soon become utterly unrecognizable and completely unreconcilable with remaining a proper constitutional democracy. These are things to think and pray about. These are things to discuss with your family, friends, and neighbors. These are things to write your parliamentarian about. And share this video with them. It'll be also written in the blog. Share the blog with them. Let them read it. Let them know on no uncertain terms how they're betraying their constitutional responsibility, their sacred sworn duty to the people of Canada and to God. God bless you. Have a great afternoon.